David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the show. A very special Shana Tova to everyone who is celebrating the new year today. But even that could not keep us away from the show today. And good thing, because so much happened over the weekend. To start with, Donald Trump has cracked over the weekend, tweeting about the same craziness about impeachment, including a ridiculous Fox News segment, nearly 20 times alone there, close to 100 tweets in total. I don't even know the exact number, and starting to suggest that his own impeachment could lead to an American civil war. We're going to get to all of the elements of this. Donald Trump tweeting endlessly, a Fox News segment that reeked of desperation. I am coining the term agit-trash today, because the term agit-prop is not quite accurate. It's a little too Soviet in its connotations to describe what it is that Fox News has been displaying in defense of Donald Trump against impeachment. So I'm calling what Fox is producing and Trump is tweeting out, better named agit-trash. Let's try to get that one into Urban Dictionary. Trump also threatening civil war if he is impeached, truly losing it. So let's look at this extraordinarily childish, embarrassing, deluded behavior of what is ultimately a panicked and terrified man. That's what we have today in Donald Trump. Look at this nonstop barrage of failed attempts at using the English language by Donald Trump, including nearly a dozen tweets this morning, 3 tweets this morning about Adam Schiff that make no sense and are just the normal types of attacks we would see normally from internet trolls, but this is the president of the United States. Earlier, with another 3-tweet storm about China, quoting known Trump sycophantic brown-noser Maria Bartiromo, who I've spoken about before, and of course, raising the term witch hunt. That puts us up to 6 tweets. Then he starts tweeting anyone who will defend him. He will just retweet them anywhere. That'll get you retweeted by Donald Trump. One interview with Republican Kevin McCarthy, who defended Trump. Another, of course, with the completely unhinged and outrageous Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who has become one of Trump's prominent defenders. Another of Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump retweeting that. Another TV segment from Lou Dobbs on Fox Business. We're now up to 10 tweets, and this is just the last 9 hours. And this is all nothing compared to what else happened on Twitter with Trump. Then we go to late last night, and this is when Trump really was getting himself wound up. We're going sort of in reverse chronological order in groups here. Now, with these, I'm not going to read every tweet because it's too insane and it's just too much. Trump attacking Nancy Pelosi, talking about impeachment, quoting Fox News and the radical left, and talking about Hillary Clinton and going after the whistleblower. These are the endless, unending tweets of an unwell man. And we are now up to 21 tweets about this in the prior 12 hours. 21 tweets. And then Trump goes on to the Fox News agit-trash. There was a completely loony segment, and I encourage you to watch it. It's like close to 10 minutes long. And it featured this whacked out right-winger, Mark Levin, I think it was Sean Hannity who started calling him the Great One, and it's like a completely meaningless nickname. And of course, Mark Levin defended Trump and said this is all an unconstitutional attempt to remove Donald Trump from power by a means other than an election. Trump tweeted that segment endless times, hilariously sandwiched with a Rosh Hashanah greeting in the middle. Not counting that, we're up to 24 tweets in the last slightly more than 12 hours related to Donald Trump's impeachment. And then, I'm not going to get into this in detail, retweeting endless, just random people who went on Twitter and said Mark Levin crushed it on Fox News. I'm not going to read each one, but these are just random Trump sycophants who agree with a clueless Fox News agit-trash clown about how great and innocent Donald Trump is. About 30 tweets of that, just random people who Donald Trump is retweeting. More than a dozen others we're talking about, between the tweets and the retweets and the agit-trash tweets, I think we're talking about 100 or so tweets here in total, dating back to the beginning of the weekend. Trump just retweeting anybody who's willing to defend him on Fox News, and retweeting Twitter randos who are saying good things about him. And then the cherry on top, the specific threat of a civil war, going back to one of Donald Trump's tweets and retweets, quoting Pastor Robert Jeffress. He's a radical extremist himself, who we've spoken about before, saying, quote, "If the Democrats are successful in removing the president from office, which they will never be, it will cause a civil war-like fracture in this nation from which our country will never heal." That's Donald Trump quoting Pastor Robert Jeffress via Fox News on Twitter. This is not the behavior of a well person. This is not the behavior of an innocent person. This is not the behavior of someone who has no interest in interfering or tampering with witnesses in what is now an increasingly popular impeachment inquiry against Donald Trump, which I will talk about next. The only real debate, I mean, listen, when I look at this, nearly 100 tweets over the weekend, President of the United States, I don't debate, wow, does Donald Trump act like an innocent or guilty person? The ship has sailed on that debate. I don't ask myself, is Trump coherently using the English language to communicate things of meaning, or is he not? The guy is completely incoherent. That's not a debate in my mind. The only real question I have is the logical next place for Trump to be removed from office and put in prison, or to be removed from office and put in a mental institution? And I don't mean that satirically. I don't mean it to be in any way demeaning or stigmatizing or making fun of actual mental illness. And I know a lot of people get mad and they say, David, you know, you're sort of insulting mentally ill people when you say Trump may be mentally ill. He's just a terrible person. I don't know the answer. This is not a well person. That's what I can tell you. The other remaining questions are increasingly being answered by these erratic and nonstop tweets. And the only question I have is, where is the logical next resting ground for Donald Trump? Support for Donald Trump's impeachment has exploded drastically since the start of the impeachment inquiry against Donald Trump was announced last week. Half of those who have an opinion about this say that the impeachment process should start. It's 43 to 43, with about 13% undecided. This 43% number is up nearly 20% from the last poll, which had only 36% supporting impeachment. That is now up to 43%. That is a 20% increase. Don't email me and say I'm wrong. I'm not saying it's a 20 percentage point increase. It's a 20% increase. Very importantly, support for impeachment is up not just among Democrats, also among some Republicans and even some independents. Support for the impeachment inquiry has increased. And let's dig into it a little more to get a better understanding. There's an argument. The argument is support for impeachment will go up as more information from the impeachment inquiry comes out and people realize what it is Donald Trump is accused of doing. The poll has data that supports that assertion. Shockingly, in this poll, only 34% of Americans say that they heard some about the Ukraine fiasco. Another 34% in this poll say they haven't heard much or anything about the Ukraine fiasco. So understand that with 68% of respondents saying they've either heard nothing, not much, or only some about the Ukraine fiasco, 43% still support impeachment. This supports the idea that as people learn about what has taken place, support for impeachment will go up even more. This poll, by the way, was taken before we heard from Acting Director of National Intelligence Joe Maguire in congressional testimony. This was a poll taken before the release of the recording in which Donald Trump implies that the whistleblower or the informant to the whistleblower should be killed. This 43% support level was before lots of the things that we've since learned. And then we have a newer CBS News poll where 55% of Americans approve with the impeachment inquiry. An even higher number, meaning 55 minus 36 is 19, 19 divided by 36. That's more than a 50% increase, not percentage point, more than a 50% increase from when before all of this started. Now, that all being said, this impeachment inquiry could still backfire on Democrats. The reference point is, look at how Bill Clinton's impeachment backfired on Republicans in the 1990s. That's a fair point of contrast, although there were some important differences with the Bill Clinton situation. Clinton generally was more likable than Trump. That's not my opinion. That's the polling. Bill Clinton didn't interfere in the impeachment process, while Trump already is and certainly will continue to do so. Clinton's impeachment, in the end, he lied, but he lied related to an affair that he had. Trump has been caught red-handed suppressing whistleblower reports about his bribery and extortion of Ukraine for the benefit of his 2020 reelection campaign. So there are important differences between the Clinton impeachment and the Trump impeachment. With Trump, we are only at step one, which is the inquiry. That's all. That's where we are right now. But support up drastically since just before this was announced. Let me know what you think about all of this. Let me know what you think about the inquiry. Let me know what you think about support for the inquiry. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. I will be streaming tonight, probably on Twitch at twitch.tv/David Pakman, and I hope you'll join me there as well.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Kevin Tuckheim and Brad Matthews. Kevin and Brad, thank you for your support. This is a program that is primarily funded by viewers and listeners who say, I like what you're doing, David. I'm going to sign up and contribute a few bucks a month or a couple $dozen for the year, which you can do at joinpakman.com. Takes under a minute to sign up. And I hope someday you will not only be new member of the day, but longtime sustainer of the day. Today, Nancy Bernard is our longtime sustainer of the day. She's been a David Pakman Show member for nearly 5 years. And I really appreciate your support, Nancy. Join these great people by signing up at joinpakman.com. I believe that the normal rates for membership are extraordinarily reasonable. But if you would prefer a discount, you can use the code THISIS2020 and it'll save you 40%. There's a political consultant who went on MSNBC and said, if you were supporting Bernie Sanders over Elizabeth Warren, given everything that we know today, you are sexist. I wish that this was a fake headline. It is not. Let's look at the video of Emily Tisch Sussman saying this in her own words, doing the thing where she says, some people are saying if you support Bernie over Warren, it's sexist. And I think there might be something to it. Take a look.
There's a ceiling. There is nowhere to go, but there is no up to go. And all of those support, I actually overheard someone saying that I thought was an interesting point, that basically at this point, if you are still supporting Sanders as opposed to Warren, it's kind of showing your sexism because she has more detailed plans and her plans have evolved. I thought it was an interesting point, and I think there may be something to it.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
It's a good answer, Chris.
What? There are there's at least 3 layers through which we need to analyze this, 3 lenses through which we need to try to understand this. First of all is just the sheer stupidity of this comment. If you have 2 candidates and one is male and another is female, if supporting the male is a sign of sexism against the female candidate, then by extrapolation from that, if you have a Jewish candidate and a Christian candidate, and you support the Christian candidate, Elizabeth Warren in this case, that must be anti-Semitism against the Jewish candidate Bernie Sanders, right? No, I would be an idiot if I tried to make that argument. I would immediately lose all credibility to put forth any kind of political analysis, which is why I'm not going to make such a stupid argument. And that's equally dumb as what Emily Tisch Sussman says here. That's the argument that's being made. And I hesitate to even use the term argument because it's not really an argument. It's just nonsense. So that's problem number 1. The argument is idiotic. Secondly, we have here the growing problem that I've been telling you about. Last week, I did a segment where I said the critiques from left to left, the critiques among Democratic primary voters of other Democratic candidates are starting to get to be the level of toxicity that is going to hurt the eventual nominee and help Donald Trump in 2020. Okay? These are the types of more vicious and inaccurate attacks that are going to self-destruct and lead to the reelection of Donald Trump. And there are all sorts of reasons why someone might support Bernie Sanders over Elizabeth Warren. And there are reasons people are supporting Elizabeth Warren over Bernie Sanders, none of which have to do with religion or gender. Bernie, for example, has been clear that Medicare for all is the path forward for healthcare. Now, you can agree or disagree with that. That's his position. Elizabeth Warren has been more wishy-washy. Now, you might agree with Warren. There are reasonable people who can say, you know, I don't want to put all my eggs in the Medicare for all basket. And so I like Elizabeth Warren's more open-minded approach. Or you could say, I don't see Elizabeth Warren as open-minded. I see her merely as wishy-washy and unwilling to take a position. I'm going with Bernie on this issue. None of that has to do with religion. None of that has to do with gender. Warren voted for a bigger Pentagon budget. Bernie voted against it. That might be a reason to vote for Bernie. Has nothing to do with sexism, obviously. Bernie won't take corporate PAC money in the general, and Elizabeth Warren will. There's a big argument to be had about that. On the one hand, do you want someone who is potentially going to be at a disadvantage merely because they're saying, I won't take PAC money and my opponent will, and that hurts me? Or you could say, I love that Bernie is not going to compromise principles and he is not going to take corporate PAC money in the general. Whatever, right? I'm just telling you what the arguments are. To say that supporting the male candidate, because as Emily Tisch Sussman said, Warren's plans are more detailed, supposedly, is absurd and pathetic. It actually is. It's so sad that this is what things have come to. These are ridiculous attacks that are baseless at their core, but they're destructive to the movement. There are serious critiques and disagreements anyone can have with Bernie or with Warren, but this is absurd, childish, and counterproductive. Now, the other thing, layer 3, as we might call it, is that this particular consultant or pundit or whatever, Emily Tisch Sussman, she is part of the Democratic establishment that has shown that they don't like Bernie. She's the former vice president of campaigns for the Center for American Progress, an establishment Democratic outfit. Her father, Donald Sussman, was one of the top Hillary donors in 2016, donating more than $22 million to Hillary. So I think you probably understand what's going on here. This is truly terrible stuff. You hate to see it if what you care about is removing Donald Trump in 2020. And unfortunately, more and more Democrats are doing it. I'm not saying everybody's the same. Not every candidate has this going on to the same degree. But we've seen enclaves of toxic Bernie supporters. We've seen toxic enclaves of Bernie detractors. We've seen Biden supporters who are doing right-wing talking points about socialism and communism, about Bernie and Warren. We've seen anti-Biden people that are going well beyond what the evidence tells us should be the case against Biden into what are smears. We've seen Warren detractors. We've seen the cult of personality around Tulsi Gabbard with some of her supporters. Yang supporters, some of them have been going over the line. This is getting bad. This is exactly how we lose. And I hope, what else can I say? I hope that everybody realizes this and abandons this strategy. Now, speaking of which, this may be one of the last segments I do about Tulsi Gabbard, okay? And it's an interesting one. Tulsi Gabbard gave a ridiculously laughable interview to cultural critic and arbiter of big ideas, Dave Rubin, wherein she accepted Dave Rubin's ridiculous right-wing framing of questions uncritically, much the way that many of the candidates did during the early 2020 Democratic presidential primary debates. And Tulsi Gabbard has now also started to attack Elizabeth Warren in ways that are absolutely ridiculous. She is also stepping back from Medicare for all. So let's look in detail, okay? On NPR's WBUR, Tulsi Gabbard was asked about Medicare for all, and she was squirrely once again, saying, quote, "Yes, I support it. I prefer to call it Medicare choice, where we are ensuring quality health care for all people, regardless of how little they may have in their pocket or their bank account, while maintaining their freedom of choice. If they've got an employer-sponsored plan or a union-sponsored plan that they're happy with, they should have the opportunity to do so." Who's talking about taking away whatever plans can survive in the market if people want them at what they will cost if a lot of people abandon those markets? This is the Republican framing. And these are the right-wing questions at debates that need to be called out as such. She's asked, do you support Medicare for all? She says, well, I support choice because I don't want people having the plans they have taken away if they like them. That's the right-wing framing around this issue. The issue is not making private insurance illegal. Here's a clip, similar question that was asked.
I also believe, like every other developed country in the world that has universal health care, that there is a role for private insurance to play for those who want it.
Do you think for those who are embracing taking away private insurance from people, ultimately, is that just strategically, politically, a non-starter?
I don't know about the politics of it. I just think about it from the perspective of people, of the American people, that if all of a sudden you are taking away their choice, that's not a very American thing, in my opinion. I think our responsibility as leaders is to meet the challenge and address the problems that people are facing, that they are suffering because of big insurance and big pharma's influence over our healthcare system for so long, how they are profiting on the backs of sick people. So let's do our job, try to bring down the cost of healthcare in this country that's exorbitant, make sure people can get the quality care they need, and if they still choose that that's not what they want, they can go get the private insurance.
Focusing on you shouldn't take away people's choice. This is Republican framing. The debate over making private insurance illegal is not the real serious debate. This is a silly talking point that is being used by people who want to avoid simply saying, yes, Medicare for all is the way. And you know what? You don't have to say that. I would listen, I don't agree with Joe Biden's position on healthcare. I just think he's wrong. I don't agree with it. But he's at least being upfront that he doesn't see Medicare for all as the path. He's telling us he wants to play around the fringes. He wants to tweak Obamacare, public option he's talking about. He's telling us what it is that he supports. This is the way that people talk about Medicare for all when they want to avoid saying, yes, I'm for Medicare for all, period, or no, I'm actually against it. They do this exact language about, I don't want to take away people's choices. Now, what's crazy is that there are Tulsi sycophants who just won't stop accusing anyone who points out what I'm pointing out here of misrepresenting her or of being a bad faith person. This is the exact thing that the Jordan Peterson sycophants say. Anytime you critique Jordan Peterson, you are accused by his followers of misrepresenting what he said. And that is exactly what is happening with the many people who heard what Tulsi said and realized it's not really making sense. And then really lame and also somewhat funny, she attacked, Tulsi did, Elizabeth Warren for being unqualified to be president. Take a look at this.
So you've been critical of Senator Harris in the past and even went so far as to question whether she was prepared to be commander-in-chief. We now see Senator Warren really rising in the polls. She's first in a lot of national polls and several state polls as well, early state polls. Do you believe that she's prepared to be commander-in-chief?
I haven't seen much come from her in the way of what kind of leadership and decision-making that she would bring to that most important responsibility that the president has as commander-in-chief. And just as a soldier and an American, that's very concerning for me. So, you know, for voters, I think that's an important thing to look out for from everyone who's running for president is what kind of experience do you have in this area? What kind of depth and understanding do you bring to these very nuanced and complex issues with how the United States is relating with other countries, what kind of leadership we're providing in the world, and having the kind of foresight and judgment that we've seen leaders from across both party lines have lacked for far too long that have brought us to this position where, you know, for all three of us, we've seen our country at war for the vast majority of the years that we've been alive.
What is Tulsi talking about? And of course, you know, the necessary, both sides have lacked leadership. Okay, but in very different ways that are not even remotely equal. So here's the deal. First and foremost, for Tulsi to attack Elizabeth Warren and say Elizabeth Warren is unqualified to be president, you could generally say we need fewer lawyers and business people and career politicians in government. Instead, we need scientists and, you know, what you could have that general conversation. And that's a very good conversation to have. But for Tulsi to say Warren's not qualified, to the extent that being an elected official qualifies you, Tulsi's a member of the House and Warren's a member of the Senate. If you zero that out, then it's a debate. Is Warren's experience with the CFPB, her knowledge of the law as a law professor, her experience teaching school? Tulsi was in the military and was a local Hawaii politician. You can say neither's qualified in the way that we want presidents to be qualified. But for Tulsi to say Warren's not qualified is just a joke when she's the one also running for president, right? But here's the real issue with Tulsi and with other candidates. Let's step back a little bit from Tulsi and make this a bigger thing, because Tulsi's going to be gone soon. She's got no shot at this thing. The cults of personality around some candidates are problematic. Tulsi Gabbard has a huge cult of personality around her. I've been told, although I've never seen, that there are entire YouTube channels dedicated merely to doing Tulsi apologia, defending anything she says, no matter how outrageous. I've been told there are similar channels around Andrew Yang. Can you imagine a YouTube channel whose very existence is just devoted to defending one candidate like they are sort of heroic or almost deifying them in some way? And I remember back in 2016, there were channels that popped up like that around Bernie Sanders. And I voted for Bernie Sanders in the 2016 Democratic primary. But a channel devoted to defending everything that Bernie Sanders says. And most of those channels have, of course, evaporated since 2016, although some are coming back. So the real problem I have with the Tulsi sycophants and the Bernier busters, the people who defend Trump unfailingly, unflinchingly, is that they've seemed to have forgotten that people are just people. One of the things that hopefully we learn as we grow up is that everybody is just a person. Our parents aren't omnipotent or omniscient, right? That's something you learn as you come of age. Our teachers weren't and aren't all-knowing. They're just people and they know about some stuff. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, the praying at the altar of certain candidates like they are, excuse the phrase, God's gift to humanity is extremely concerning. Some politicians know more or less about different things. Some are more or less experienced, but they're all just people. And I've met enough elected officials to tell you they really are just people. They're flawed people, people who may do many good things and will also mess things up. And these unflinching cults of personality from the unconditional devotees are disturbing and strange, and they're not the types of movements I want to have any part in. And when people say, David, why aren't you more strongly saying this is the person that progressives need to support in the Democratic primary? I don't see any of these people as a perfect, hypothetically, in quotes rather, in the sense that a lot of the sycophants do. And I have no problem saying, there's a lot of people here who are pretty good. Some are better than others. And there's no reason for me to now come out and maybe sort of unwillingly even participate in the growth of these cults of personality. I've told you Bernie and Warren are the most progressive in my eyes. They're both flawed. And I'm going to continue following it. But these cults of personality, these movements that are based around almost deifying a candidate are very, very concerning to me. And I want to hear from you what you think about that. We're actually going to have a couple of posts about this on our Instagram page at David Pakman Show. Follow us there and follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. I may be picking what could be the last green pepper of the season from my pepper plant later today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
All right, there's a new report that the Trump White House has been hiding not only the transcript with the Ukrainian president's phone call with Donald Trump, but also transcripts with Vladimir Putin, as well as Saudi royals, including the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And of course, is anyone surprised? Why wouldn't they? Who would believe that the White House has this entire other computer system for hiding things, and the only thing they hid was the transcript with the Ukrainian president? Of course they're using it for other things. And there are new reports which say that the transcripts from calls with the Russian President Vladimir Putin and a number of members of the Saudi royal family, again, including Mohammed bin Salman, are hidden on a separate server. Where does that ring a bell? Wasn't it Hillary who had problems with private servers and improperly handling information another instance of projection from Donald Trump. And of course, we already have the whistleblower complaining, alleging that this was done with Donald Trump's Ukraine phone call. And now the New York Times and CNN have been told by other sources that actually this is being done with all sorts of communication. So this is, number one, much worse than just one phone call. And then number two, it's also much worse than just Trump, because we are now getting more and more names of people that are being pulled into the circle of knowledge of who was aware that this was going on. There are allegations that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and then National Security Advisor John Bolton were the only people in the room for some of these calls, which were then buried. There are now committees that want to question Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. Trump said he would have the most transparent administration in history. The opposite is true, going to new lengths, Nixonian lengths, even more than Nixonian lengths, to hide transcripts. The Trump administration has ignored subpoenas of all sorts of documents meant to increase transparency. They were asked for lease agreements from Trump properties. They were asked for documents about the transfer of nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia. They just ignore all of those requests. When a whistleblower comes forward to try to expose some of this stuff, Trump is caught on a recording, which I played for you last week, hinting that either the whistleblower or the people or person who informed the whistleblower should be killed like we used to do to people who committed treason. This is not transparent. This is transparently corrupt, better said, and they just don't care. And if you've been following the administration, you're not surprised at the minutia of it. But what you really have to understand, we're starting to think increasingly in post-Trump terms, because either in a year and a half or in 5.5 years, scary to think about, Trump's going to go. And the long-lasting impact will be not only all of those judges that he will have appointed by the time he's done, who will control the judiciary for a very, very long time, not only the alliances with other countries, our historic Democratic allies that Donald Trump has ruined relationships with, that will be one of the legacies. But what Donald Trump has done is so fundamentally at odds with democracy. And what you have to understand is that there is actually, in most democracies, even, liberal democracies, there is a portion of the population that wants tyranny, or at least they're open to tyranny rather than democracy, as long as they are the ones who get to enforce it. And that is maybe the most accurate way to describe what we have in the Trump administration. We can point out the individual authoritarian tendencies. We can point out Trump being just so smitten with Duterte and Putin and Kim Jong-un and, the whole list, Bolsonaro, whoever you want to include, and being increasingly distant and at odds with just liberal democratic leaders. Germany, the UK, well, not the UK anymore now that it's Trump 2, Boris Johnson, but you get the idea. We can point that out. But what underlies this is that we really have a segment of these right-wing authoritarians that are about tyranny, as long as it's a tyranny they get to enforce. And that is extremely, extremely scary. And allegedly, and we'll talk about this next, there are some Republicans who, if they voted on impeachment on a secret ballot, would be willing to remove Donald Trump. And that's what I want to talk about next. Former Republican Senator Jeff Flake says that at least 35 Republican senators would vote to remove Donald Trump if the Senate impeachment vote were private. So let's back up a little bit. The entire time I've been talking to you about impeachment, I've been accurately saying, I believe, that as long as Republicans control the Senate, Trump will not be removed by impeachment. The House Democrats can do their impeachment inquiry. If it leads them to saying we are filing articles of impeachment, they can do it. They can do the impeachment trial. But no matter what, once it goes to the Republican-controlled Senate, which there will be at least until January of 2021, and I believe until January of 2023, based on the Senate election map, you are not going to remove Trump because Republicans would not vote to convict Trump on an impeachment charge. Now, I've not mentioned it, but implied in this is that impeachment votes in the Senate are public. The way you see senators vote on stuff, yay, nay, up vote, down vote, the way they do that, they would publicly vote on impeachment in that same way. But in the back of my mind, and that of many others, was the question of, imagine that the Senate impeachment vote was not public, but instead it was private. So at the end of the vote, you would get the number of senators who voted to impeach and the number of senators who voted to acquit. Would you have some Republicans who would be willing to vote for the removal of Donald Trump if that's where the evidence brought them? Would Republican senators vote to impeach Trump if they knew that their vote would not be public and therefore they would potentially not be subject to the political repercussions of it? And the growing idea, according to a couple of reports, is that the answer is yes. We first heard from Republican political consultant Mike Murphy. And Mike Murphy said on MSNBC that if the vote was private, 30 Republican senators would back impeachment. Then we heard from former Republican Senator Jeff Flake, who said at the Texas Tribune Festival over the weekend that it's not, or Thursday it was, it's not 30 Republican senators that would vote to impeach Trump. It's more like at least 35 who would back impeachment if the impeachment vote were private. And because of the balance of power, you actually don't even need 30 or even 35 Republicans to get behind impeachment. You would only need about 20, assuming that all Democrats and independent senators voted for it. But this is mostly hypothetical because, once again, it's not a private ballot. It's a public ballot, just like everything that goes on in the Senate. There's one other element to this, which is it's not as simple to say if the vote were private, 35 Republicans would be in favor of it. Because even if the vote were private, those Republican senators who vote against impeachment would come out and say afterwards, even if it's a private vote, I voted against impeachment. And this would immediately put the spotlight on the Republicans that don't come forward and say, I voted against convicting. And they would either have to lie or admit it. So it's sort of a fantasy that it would even go down in this way. But what this signals then is a huge cowardice on the part of the Republicans, because if it's true that they're only willing to vote to impeach if the vote is secret and it doesn't have political ramifications for them, it's merely a political calculation. Now, the upside, if we want to find a silver lining here, is that I guess they're not all blindly loyal to Donald Trump. The downside is they're afraid to act on it unless it's done in a way that it will have no consequences whatsoever. I read a comment online when researching the story that sums it up as, they're not all traitors, some merely have no integrity. And it's not even just lack of integrity. There's also the issue of hypocrisy, because in addition to the lacking integrity, they would instantly be voting to impeach a Democratic president who had done all of the things that Donald Trump has done. This may not even be a decision they end up having to make. We're just at the beginning of the inquiry, which happens before articles are filed, which would happen before all of the other things that we've discussed. But if Jeff Flake is only 20% correct, if Mike Murphy is only 30% correct, that means that there would be the desire from enough Republicans in the Senate to impeach that it could remove Donald Trump. But mark my words, you are not going to see it under this current Republican-controlled Senate. Let's take a break. We will be back with much more right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There are numerous hilarious new reports that Fox News has been dropped into a state of complete chaos, or more accurately, bedlam, according to the reports that are now out as a result of the impeachment inquiry against President Donald Trump. Remember, I've been telling you for a long time now, there is nothing fixed or immutable about Trump and Fox News being on the same team or on the same page. Fox News is right-wing media. Fox News can be Donald Trump's vehicle for promoting and defending his lies and his propaganda. But also Fox News could separate from Trump and say, we are for conservatism and conservative values, which I find despicable, but certainly Donald Trump doesn't represent. Trump represents this cartoonish, ignorant Republican cluelessness, not conservatism. That's for sure. Now, you might remember that this was the case for a while. Early in the 2016 Republican primary, before Donald Trump gained momentum, in 2015 even, Fox News was not on Donald Trump's side. And very publicly, they sparred, but eventually Fox News came around. And recently, the commentary people on Fox News people like Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson, that kooky judge Jeanine Pirro, they've remained stalwart defenders of Donald Trump. But some of the news people have not. Shep Smith, Chris Wallace, John Roberts, there are others who have just been telling basic uncontroversial truths about Trump. And on Fox News, that goes against what you're seeing from the opinion people. There are now endlessly entertaining reports in New York Magazine and in The Guardian and in other publications about the state of total chaos in which Fox News now finds itself since the news of the impeachment inquiry against Donald Trump went live. To understand this, you have to understand that Fox News is one entity, but it's huge, and it's a bunch of smaller entities. You've got the news and opinion sides, and on Fox News, those two sides are actually deliberately blurred, but they are still ostensibly separate sides. You have each show being its own little island with its own production team and writers and friends that they have in positions of power. Hannity, for example, having Trump specifically as one of his powerful friends. And there are massive fractures starting to develop at Fox News since the Ukraine fiasco started. So some examples of this. Last week, I played a clip for you where Shepard Smith invited Fox News chief legal analyst, senior legal analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano on his show. And Napolitano said, listen, this is not a political analysis. This is how these laws, these statutes are defined. And if you apply Donald Trump's actions to the statutes, or maybe better said, you apply the statutes to Donald Trump's actions, Trump committed crimes and he is impeachable, period. Meanwhile, you have Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity chalking up the entire impeachment inquiry to a witch hunt. Tucker even invited this lunatic former prosecutor, Joe DeGeneva, on his show, who straight up said, oh, that other legal analyst on Shep's show, Andrew Napolitano, he's a fool. And you've got Fox News legal analysts eating themselves. You have Fox News hosts and anchors going after each other. And the next day, Shepard Smith went right back on air. And he said that Tucker Carlson is repugnant for not backing the legal position of Andrew Napolitano when he was attacked on air. And this then led to the Fox News CEO, Suzanne Scott, and the president of the channel, Jay Wallace, having to interfere to cool it down. And reportedly, they told Shepard Smith, according to Vanity Fair, that if he attacks Tucker Carlson on air again, he's going to be pulled off the air altogether. That's not all. You then saw Juan Williams on a Fox News show called The Five. And he said that his Trump loyalist colleagues are merely repeating White House talking points, while Sean Hannity was tweeting that everyone is lying about what's going on at Fox News. And this is exactly as predicted. At a certain point, you are not defending so-called conservative principles by defending Trump. I'm against these so-called conservative principles, but Donald Trump doesn't actually represent them in any serious way. Nothing that is going on right now about defending Trump's conservative view on abortion or taxation or foreign policy is about conservatism. This is just arguing about how corrupt, how criminal, how treasonous is this administration, and actual conservative thinkers, to the extent that they exist, they're not seeing anything that they can defend in Donald Trump other than, I guess, he's undoing some of the things that Barack Obama did. There's a report that former Republican Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, is pushing Fox News to abandon Donald Trump, full stop. Paul Ryan might have the power to do this because he's now on the board of Fox News since leaving the House of Representatives, another one of these revolving door swamp filling instances. But next year is going to be fascinating to watch on Fox News from a media analysis point of view. But we need to capitalize on this by punishing Trump, by making sure that Trump is removed from office, because we don't want this entire Fox News thing to be some mere curiosity or entertainment only. We want it to be productive in some way. They are starting to eat themselves. Democrats need to make sure not to do that, as I warned earlier in the show, so that we can actually take advantage of this situation and get Donald Trump removed in November of 2020. One of the things that Donald Trump has said a number of times now to try to convince people that impeaching him is a bad idea is he's been saying the stock market would crash if I got impeached. Now, it's not a crazy thing to suggest. Markets in general don't like instability. The removal of a president, or even the attempted removal of a president, is a form of instability. So it is reasonable to think, wow, if Trump were impeached and convicted for removal, the markets would absolutely crash. And Donald Trump has kept pushing this lately. He tweeted late last week, quote, "If they actually did this, the markets would crash." Do you think it was luck that got us to the best stock market and economy in our history? It wasn't. So put aside for a second that most stocks are held by relatively few people, richer people. And so the level of the stock market is not the best indicator of the health of the economy. Put that aside just for a second, okay? There's a good case to be made that markets would actually do really well and might even soar rather than crash if Donald Trump were impeached. Rick Newman from Yahoo Finance makes the case for this. And Rick points out that, number one, markets have been relatively stable since the impeachment inquiry was announced. You've actually seen very few big swing days one way or the other since the impeachment inquiry was announced. That's the first sign that we should question this so-called conventional wisdom of impeachment is terrible for the markets. But Rick Newman actually says markets would soar if Trump was impeached because the things that Donald Trump has done, which tend to boost stocks. Now, this is for better or worse. This is not me saying I agree with these policies, but Trump has done tax cuts and deregulation. Very often that boosts stocks. Of course, there's an expense to that as well, which we can talk about. Those would in principle stay if Donald Trump were removed. But a lot of the bad things Trump has done would likely end. The tariffs, the xenophobia, interfering with free markets, even on things like immigration. Immigration is great for the economy. The gains from immigration, even including undocumented immigration, are far greater than the costs to the economy. Now, this all has a cost to it, right? Low wages, poor conditions for many legal and illegal immigrants. I'm not making a moral analysis here. I'm merely making an economic one for the sake of discussion. And there is a strong case to be made that if Donald Trump were impeached and removed, it would not crash the stock market the way Donald Trump is pointing out. Now, there's a bigger argument, which is if the right thing to do for legal reasons, on the basis of the evidence, for moral reasons, is to impeach a president, you do it. You don't make the calculation that in the short term, the market won't like it, so we let a president remain president who shouldn't be president. That's a separate argument. What we're talking about merely is the practicality and the logistics of the market will crash versus the market will soar if Trump is impeached. Let me give you another example. The craziness with Iran. What's bad for markets is the instability with Iran, which would probably calm down if Donald Trump was removed from office. Now, Rick Newman is also saying that if Trump were replaced with Pence, the economy would be much better off. I find Pence disgusting and it would be terrible. But the main point here that Rick Newman is making, and which I think is a valid point to make, or at least to propose, is that Donald Trump's removal would not be terrible for the economy as a foregone conclusion. And we need to challenge all of those ideas merely because they might have been accurate 20 years ago, merely because it seems to make some intuitive sense, does not mean that we should fall for it hook, line, and sinker. And more importantly, one way or the other, this is not the basis on which impeachment should be decided upon. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. This is pretty funny. Last week, we had a voicemail that I didn't really understand, which said, "Hey, David, is the entire Bernie Sanders thing a distraction?" And I wondered which thing and a distraction from what. We have now someone following up who is concerned about another distraction on the program. Take a listen to this.
Hi, David. This is Michael from Missouri. I wanted to just call and ask you about the whole producer Pat thing. I mean, do you think that it's a distraction? Thanks.
Yeah. You know, I do think that the entire producer Pat thing is a huge distraction, and that's why we're going to be asking him about it on today's bonus show, where we will discuss there is a growing movement that says TV producers are doing something ethically wrong by putting Rudy Giuliani on TV because he just lies. That's all he does. Joe Biden is one of those people. We will talk about that. We will also talk about the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Now, you're probably thinking I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. The Trump administration is now, in the wake of the impeachment inquiry, in the wake of being caught red-handed, not even saying that they were trying to collude is an understatement, forcing collusion with Ukraine. They are now ramping up an investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. It is still going on. We will also talk about a very interesting interview with former British Prime Minister David Cameron, who is calling the Brexit referendum that led to everything we have seen since January 23, 2016, the day of that vote, his greatest regret. And it still is not clear. In fact, it is sort of more and more clear. It's unclear that Brexit is going to happen. You could also argue it is more clear that it is not going to happen, but we'll have that conversation on the bonus show. All of those stories and more, including the distraction of producer Pat, as the voicemail caller said, on today's bonus show. 2 ways to get access: become a member at joinpacman.com, become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. And remember, you can call the voicemail number 24 hours a day. And many of you do. The number of voicemails we get between like 2 and 5 a.m. Eastern time is high. It's very, very high. 219-2-DAVID-P is the number, and I hope you will join me this evening for a live stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/David Pakman. Follow me, subscribe there with Twitch Prime, and I hope you'll join me this evening.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.